All right, so welcome to the 6th episode of Mixed Extent. I'm your host, Anthony Nocentino, with my co-hosts, Mark Podman's Gambit Wilkinson and Andrew, I should have used iScuzzy Prusky. In this episode, our topic is Azure SQL. And we have two very special guests with us to talk about cloud and Azure SQL. That's Anna Hoffman and Bob Ward. Welcome, Anna. Welcome, Bob. Let's do a quick introduction of both of them if you don't know who they are, but let's be serious. Anna Hoffman is a data and applied scientist on the Azure Data product team at Microsoft, spending most of her time working in Azure SQL and participating in the community to democratize intelligence over all of your data from ground to cloud. Bob is a principal architect on the Microsoft Azure Data SQL Server team and is also the author of the books Pro SQL Server on Linux, SQL Server 2019 Revealed, and most recently, Azure SQL Revealed, which is currently sitting on my desk that I've used to reference as a reference for today's podcast. So welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
So, awesome.
I love how your voice goes into presenter mode there, Anthony. It's like chatting away, and then all of a sudden it's like, right. Good afternoon.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. So, all right. So before we get into the questions, just some logistics. The next AKB is coming up soon at the end of the month on the 27th of January. Again, we have a collection of world-class speakers that will be presenting on those deep dive internals topics that you come to expect from AKB and Mixed Extents. Mark, do your thing with the link here, right? Cool. Then next is for this session, for today's session, like I said, AKB generally in Mixed Extents focuses on internals, but the goal for today's conversation team is really to get our internals focused audience kind of working towards that cloud journey, stuff that both of Anna and Bob have been out in the community talking about for a pretty good chunk of time now, right? And so that's kind of really the kickoff question is for this group, right, that might not be familiar with the term Azure SQL, right? What is Azure SQL? What does that mean to a DBA when they hear that and they see things like Azure SQL Revealed as a book title? So if you guys want to go ahead and dive into that a little bit.
Anna, you go first. You're really good at summarizing this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anthony. That's a great question. And I think, it's a question we get all the time, even after sometimes we tell people what we think Azure SQL is. And, this effort of Azure SQL, this rebranding, you might call it, was really an effort to try to bring some clarity around the different options that folks have when they move to the cloud. And there's really like three main options that we all consider to fall under that Azure SQL type of umbrella. And we can kind of give like a brief overview of each of those options, and maybe Bob can chime in and give some details. But the first option, and probably the most relevant to a SQL Server professional, or the most familiar, maybe not the most relevant, is SQL Server in an Azure virtual machine. And you'll hear Bob and I say this, but this is literally just SQL Server. So everything that you know about SQL Server is going to apply. It's just running in a virtual machine, which is hosted in Azure, which is something some of you might be familiar with. There are some differences, and there are some things that we can do to help, and there are some reasons you might consider SQL Server in Azure VM. Bob, do you want to take it one step deeper? I say you like to get hyper focused. I'll pass it to you for that.
Yeah. Anna was really famous for using not only the word hyper focused in calendar year 20 for Bob Ward, but the fact that she is younger than I have been at Microsoft. That was a common theme among all our presentations. So I'll just throw that out there because she's going to say it at some point, right? So if you think about SQL Server in Azure Virtual Machine, again, think about SQL Server in VMware. We're just hosting it now instead of you putting in your own infrastructure. But because you're in Azure, we have some things we do for you, right? We're going to help you figure out how to work with our storage, our networking. And then if you register your SQL Server, whether you do it through our marketplace, you pre-install it or you install it, now we know about you, not because we're Big Brother, because we want to help you. So we can do things like automated backups, automated security patches. We even have options now in the portal to help you set up an always-on availability group. You can get great licensing benefits from it as well. So it is SQL Server with all the bells and whistles and the complete product you know about. For example, BI services as well in there. But there are advantages running in Azure because we want to help you in that whole journey.
Yeah, so that's VM, and I would say, you know, VM's probably the easiest in many cases to move to if you are looking at migrating. SQL Server and Azure VM is what we call infrastructure as a service, and I'm sure you've heard this term tossed around a bunch, but you'll hear us abbreviate it as IaaS, and basically that gives you a lot of control, but also more responsibility. So it's kind of like Spider-Man, I like to think of it like that. You know, with great power comes great responsibility, and that's kind of what you're going to get with SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine. But if you're not ready for that, and you're not quite to Spidey level of what you want to do going forward, there are platform as a service options, so PaaS options. You'll hear us call it that. And there's two main options here. The first one is Azure SQL Managed Instance, and I like to think of this as just abstracting one layer more than what you get in SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine. So you're no longer going to have access to the OS, but that also means you're not going to have be responsible for that OS. So you're not going to be responsible for updating SQL Server or the OS basically ever again. All of that responsibility now falls on Azure and Microsoft to make sure we do it seamlessly, to make sure we do it and we don't break you. So yeah, so Azure SQL Managed Instance, you can kind of think of it, you know, Bob will say the best of SQL Server with the best of a managed service. So you're going to get all the things, or most of the things about SQL Server you know and love, whether it's CLR, Service Broker, Database Mail, recently Machine Learning Services, recently DTC in preview. So we're really working to kind of bridge that feature gap. So you get everything, you just also get this versionless type of SQL.
Yeah, Anna, think about a SQL Server instance you deploy today was set up on SQL. You deploy an instance, right? You don't deploy a database on SQL Server, you deploy an instance. So think about just doing that, but you don't know about the VM. You don't even know if we're running Linux. You don't even know what we're doing behind the scenes. You just get this instance. If you went to Management Studio with managed instance, it would look like a SQL Server, right? With replication, with extended events, with all the DMVs. Every DMV that you can think of is all there from the instance. You can even look at the error log. But as Anna pointed out, we're managing behind the scenes things like backup restore, availability groups, DR, all that stuff behind the scenes being managed, including what you mentioned, versionless. Let me just add in there a little bit about the versionless concept. This is still the SQL engine. In fact, same code base that we use for SQL Server itself, but we behind the scenes can do things like even make bug fixes proactively without even telling you about it, because we proactively are looking at those kind of type things in the cloud service. We have kind of have a DevOps model, to be honest with you. We deploy behind the scenes with the engineering team, so we can look for those kind of things and fix them behind the scenes. And if you go look at things like add version with a managed instance, you're going to notice it says like 12.0. whatever, and you're going to go like, what does that mean? Well, it turns out that was the last major version of SQL we started with when we forked up into the cloud. And so we just haven't changed that. Now, it might change a little bit from a minor version perspective, but you don't worry about that. You don't look at version anymore to pay attention, what am I running on? Because we are just keeping things up to date in the cloud at all times.
So when you say, going to insert a little bit here, I guess it's going to be a pun intended with the question I'm going to ask before we move on to the third service. So is that why we saw stuff like that hot patching tech that was blogged about last year about the engineering team? Is that what's being applied here to get us versionless, but also reduce the amount of interruptions that we would see in doing like a heavier handed patching?
Yeah, hot patching, you know, we have something called a service level agreement that we have in the cloud for platforms as a service. So for managed instance and database, when you sign up for subscriptions for those services, we have to maintain a certain level of availability for you, or you get credits back from your subscription that you pay Microsoft, right? So in order to meet that service level agreement, we're going to do several things to keep you highly available. And hot patching was one of those technologies that we deployed behind the scenes to reduce any downtime for patches that we make. So yeah, that was something. Now we have thoughts about actually introducing those kind of type things for SQL Server on premises as well. Mm-hmm. But it was easier for us because we control the infrastructure. We can decide how to go deploy things like hot patching in the cloud.
Yeah, that might be worth adding that link to the podcast, Mark. If you haven't read that blog post, there's some pretty crazy engineering going on to inject instructions to basically change execution branches in code. It's like pretty cool. So sorry, Anna, it's kind of a
with the options that you've been talking about there. I'm a traditional DBA guy, so I'm all about control. I want control of my of my servers. And the way I look at it is from, if I want to run, it's about various levels of control. So if I have a VM with SQL installed that I've installed or I've used from the marketplace, then I have control of the whole OS and the SQL instance. But then if I don't care about, if I want less control, if I don't care about the OS so much, I can then shrink that down just to focus on, say, the instance that I go for, a managed instance. And then if I just want to focus on, if I just want a database to get up and running so I can build something and build my app, then I go for something like Azure SQL DB, where I just have that one database there that I'm going to build from there. Would that be a correct way of thinking about things? Or is that how it's pushed in Microsoft, or am I going off the wrong way here?
No, I think that's a great way. Personally, I think it's a great way to look at it and think about it. And it kind of, leads us into talking a little bit more about Azure SQL Database, which, like you mentioned, it's just kind of abstracting one more layer, or relinquishing one more layer of control. And so you're no longer going to have control over a lot of the things that you might have or might typically have with SQL Server or managed instance. But the idea in Azure SQL Database is that you're not necessarily concerned with those sorts of things. And there's some gives and some gets there. One of the gets is that we can innovate much faster in this space, since we do have more control over your server and your databases and that sort of thing. So for example, Hyperscale today, which is going to allow you to scale up to 100 terabytes. And that architecture is really interesting. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit later, but because that's in theory just a number. But Hyperscale is only available in Azure SQL Database today. There are some complications that come with letting you manage a whole SQL server with something like managed instance that make it a little bit more difficult for us to implement something like Hyperscale. Same goes for serverless, which is another exciting tech that's only available today in Azure SQL Database. So I think, it kind of depends like what you're looking for, what you're coming from, if this is something new, what you're comfortable with. A lot of things are going to play into the decisions of when you think about what to use when. But I think, Andrew, you're totally right. Like that's kind of like the big blocks or the big buckets I think about when I separate those.
Might have been a little bit wrong when I said control over the. It was my old way of thinking. It was like these are my machines. Maybe it's more. Maybe we should look at it more of you're taking which level you go for. Is it's taking away maybe the drudgery and the main mundane things that we have to do, say like patching and backups, and it frees us up to do maybe more exciting stuff, like go start building things, developing things, looking at all about performance tuning, looking at stuff like that, instead of having to do these maintenance tasks, because we can say, I can ship them off to the cloud and get on with the other things. So it's one way to look at it. You talk to traditional DBAs and they can be very hesitant about that. Are they going to automate my backups for me? I don't think so. But it's all about wresting control away and freeing yourself up for maybe doing the more exciting things.
Yeah, and I think sorry, go ahead.
I'm in the middle of doing that right now, Andrew, for a customer where the entry point was IaaS about 2 years ago. And then they got the development bandwidth to start focusing on how to shift to SQL DB, which there was some code changes and things like that. Things like changing time zones to be UTC, the normal stuff. But we finally got the bandwidth to do that. And we're in that process now. And honestly, looking back, it's so liberating to not have to worry about backups and patching and servers and patch windows. That's just behind us now. We're focusing on the value for the business and making sure that application is resilient and available versus using newer tech than the stuff that we've been used to doing. So sorry about that. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, it's also just a level of balance, because like, for example, with Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Managed Instance, we're going to take care of your backups for you. We are going to give you like some, knobs to turn, like how long you want your backups. If you want them for 10 years, that's an option. Or if you just want them for a day, we're giving you some flexibility, but also we're taking care of, some of the things that might not be so fun, and giving you the peace of mind, because now it's our responsibility. And like Bob mentioned, there's an SLA financial backing to that. But at the same time, we're listening to folks like you that say, hey, like this hot patching thing, this maintenance whenever you feel like a thing, it's cool, but I would love some insight to that. So like there are some previews coming into play soon around like, us telling you, okay, this is the maintenance window, and maybe one day you'll be able to specify like, this is the maintenance window I want. So I'd say like it's finding a balance.
Let me add in a little bit, Andrew, to your comment about DBAs and so forth, especially if a lot of those listening right now. One of the reasons that Ann and I embarked on this, crazy content push in CY20 on Azure SQL, and it turned out also for things like this book, was to get SQL Server users and professionals comfortable with Azure SQL. So for example, we did Azure SQL Fundamentals, which is on Microsoft Learn. So you get a free sandbox to go just play with this without spending money, right? But if you go look at our approach, how we built the fundamentals, the YouTube series, Azure SQL for Beginners, or even our Azure SQL workshop, and Anna can remember these conversations a year ago, right? Which was, how does SQL Server people view what they do today with Azure SQL? And it starts with like, what is this thing? So we go into depths of like all these options Anna just talked about, and we explain it to you to understand it in a way that you just get comfortable. And then we go into the process of explaining like, how do you deploy and configure this? And I remember talking to Anna about this word deploy. I'm like, I never use that term with SQL. I use setup with SQL. But deploy makes sense in Azure because there's a concept called a deployment. And so we actually go through the process of explaining to you the difference between deploying something with Azure SQL versus you setting up SQL Server. Like even in the book, I went to the screens of showing you SQL Server setup screens, comparing what does that feel like for Azure SQL deployment. And then we get into this heart of the content called the meat and potatoes of SQL Server with security, performance, and availability. So if you're a SQL Server person and you're like, look, I don't know how security works with Azure SQL thing, how does it compare to SQL Server? We're going to show you how, with lots of examples, lots of demonstrations, lots of labs for you to try. Performance, same way. Are my DMVs still there? How do I do things like extended events? How do I monitor performance, and how do I look at performance problems like I do in SQL with the cloud? And then availability, and that's one of the most powerful stories that we have with Azure SQL. So again, we're going to go through the process of trying to make you more comfortable with Azure SQL. And then when we were putting this all together, Anna says like, well, how should we end this thing? And she had this, and I'll let her talk about it. She had this really great idea of like, how do you go more with Azure? Like, how do you put it all together versus just this comparison with SQL?
So the funny thing about the question list, Bob, that was literally the next question, was both of you have been producing excellent content around Azure SQL and delivering it to the community. So the follow-up questions to kind of what you just said were, how's that being received? Like, do you see it making progress, or whatever expression you want to use, in the community, that folks are coming back and going, you know what, that really did help me get further along in my cloud journey? Are you seeing that in the SQL Server world?
Yeah, I would say we're definitely seeing some impact to it. We did like our video series, for example, plus our boot camp that we did on YouTube Live. I think we're at over 200,000 views. So, I mean, we're no like Python. I was comparing it to the Python for Beginners series, which has like 1 million views. So we're not there yet, but I think maybe SQL could be the new Python. Don't quote me.
Wow.
I think I speak for everyone on the AKB panel that if we got 200,000 views, we'd be fairly chuffed.
Right. Yeah. We would turn on the sponsorship thing finally. Right? Well, we don't do that.
Didn't we also, Anna, we've also had feedback from people. There's a certification that people take for Azure SQL and data, right? And Anna, what's been the feedback about their ability to do our stuff and then just get certified, right?
Yeah, so the specific exam Bob is talking about is called DP300, and it's around like managing relational databases in Azure, which pretty much lands it to talk about Azure SQL. And our feedback has been that after going through either our workshop, our boot camp, our Microsoft Learn content, what have you, is that they just go through our content and then they go pass the exam. So I think it's a great resource. And one other thing I just want to highlight is like, you might be thinking, oh, Azure SQL for Beginners. Oh, you guys are talking about like security. It's like, this is not for the faint of heart. I would say it's not really for someone that doesn't know anything about SQL Server. Like, this was meant for SQL Server people. Like at the beginning, I said, well, we should just call it Azure SQL for SQL people, because that's what it is. It's really like, how do you translate your existing skills? Like how do they make sense? Like your DBA on-prem, now what happens?
That's
definitely.
Sorry, Angie. That's actually fantastic, because I have a bet with a DBA that I work with about the DP300 exam, that whoever gets the lowest score has to buy the beers when they visit the city next. So that's fantastic. I'll be getting those links. Pablo, if you're watching, please ignore.
So the follow-up question, and it covers a couple of bases to that, is updating that content. So a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are SQL Server professionals and content producers and speakers and things like that.
And my mom.
So from
Andrew's mom.
From two different angles, right? How do you keep that content up to date for your content? And then how do you as individuals stay, I mean, you're kind of a special case because you're at Microsoft, but stay abreast of what's changing inside of Azure all the time? Like, how do you get that information and then work it back into your content?
That's been a huge challenge.
Yes.
I will tell you this, though. I actually responded to somebody on Twitter about this, which is a rare moment for me. That said, hey, the Azure SQL Revealed book, the content you built, to everybody just be aware it's probably out of date already. There's no question that we go through a process of ensuring that stuff gets up to date. In fact, we're doing it right now. We're actually going through the process right now after we delivered some of these sessions at big events like PASS or SQL Bits, and we've done boot camps and so forth. So we're going through a process, Anna and I right now, going through all those modules and making sure we update them with little tiny details. But here's the good news. The foundation of just about everything we built still works, and it's going to work for a while. Why is that? It's all based on the SQL Server engine. You got to remember, what we have in Azure SQL is still the SQL Server engine. It's still T-SQL. It still works with Management Studio and Azure Data Studio. So a lot of these foundational principles for performance, security, and availability all still apply. It's a matter of us just kind of making additions to what looks there. So we just have a plan that, I don't know, Anna, probably once a quarter or something, we will go back and look at this. And we have processes in place to update things like GitHub and Microsoft Learn. And then I think, Anna, you had some suggestions that we would put comments in our YouTube videos instead of re-recording them about any changes that might have applied.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet, but we will do that.
We're working on it. Yeah.
I'm in the middle of doing the same exact thing. So
Yeah.
that question was a little bit for me too, by the way, because I'm having to update the series of courses on Kubernetes and just doing a differential analysis and tracking all the changes. Yeah, it's lots of spreadsheets.
Well, we already updated it. We presented this information, like I said, in around August for all the videos and so forth. By the time we did the PASS Summit, we had already made changes to our deck to apply to that. And then just a call out for those who are looking at this content and wondering, like, what do I do, this kind of type thing. Just remember one thing about our GitHub content on Azure SQL Workshop, that is free. And in fact, we encourage others to take that and fork it and do whatever they want. You can charge people if you want to. I'm going to use this to train people in Azure SQL. We're open source presenters. That's a GitHub content, and that's all for everybody. And we make sure, we've been working hard to make sure the deck that we upload that goes with that is up to date with the latest information.
So I've got a question about, well, I guess it's for both of you. Were either of you kind of hesitant to kind of start wanting to even work on moving stuff towards the cloud? And if so, what was the big selling, like what was the moment you had where you're like, oh yeah, this is the way to go? Was it that balance of responsibilities or something else? And then further, like what typically sells everyone else on moving to the cloud, like that, where they had that aha moment where they get it?
I'll let you explain why you work on Azure SQL now.
Yeah, I kind of knew in December of 19, we had just released SQL 19, right? So I'd spent a lot of time writing a book about that. And I mean, I don't know how many hours and miles and places I talked about SQL 19. So I knew that if I went down this path with the cloud, the SQL Server community in general were like, uh-oh, wait, Bob Ward is going to start talking about the cloud? Like, what's going to happen now? Is SQL going away now, right? Or something, right? It was actually not that at all. It was me talking to Anna and I's manager, Assad Khan, me specifically saying, what can I do next that's big for us as a SQL server, right? And he's like, look, Bob, I think spending time in the cloud would help the community and help everyone. And especially with this thought about making people more comfortable about what this is. Not that you had to move everything to SQL Server, but if you were going to make that move, what would it feel like? But for me, as I'm building all this content, I'm learning, of course. That's a great way to learn, as you guys all know, when you build things, right? And for me, I have to admit to you, aha moment is availability. I mean, if you think about building an entire disaster recovery strategy, right? Putting a service level agreement behind it, or rolling out an availability group. If you think about doing that in your data center by yourself and doing all of that, and imagining now that you literally do not have to do that anymore, that is crazy. I don't know how many times, and it was like the video we did one time where you did a demo and I went, what was the thing? I can't remember what I said now. I was like,
oh,
it's awesome.
We'd show how fast a failover happens. and it was like 2 seconds, and we're recording it. And I think Bob thought the video had ended. He was like, wow, that was awesome.
But we kept it in there. You know, we kept that kind of aha moment in there. So I'm really being dead serious. I mean, the fact that I still, all my skills, right, all the T-SQL knowledge, my DMVs, maintaining indexes, these kind of things, I still need to do those kind of things. But to know now that with platform as a service, I have a complete service level agreement backing up this automation on backups. I mean, who knows how to go build a strategy where all your data is stored not only in a locally redundant fashion, but now your data and your backups are also geo-redundant automatically with all this stuff going on. You know, guys, I spent years, as you may know, in support patching databases. Like I spent a career doing that. We just don't have to do that anymore. I mean, if we have so much of your data spread out and redundant, this is not necessary. We have automation going behind the scenes to check integrity. We do point in time restore of pages if we have to, that you don't even know about, and keep you going online. So that whole story to me was just an incredible moment of why it could be a big benefit of going to Azure.
Yeah, the coupling in a positive sense of the engineering team having control of the product, and not necessarily they have control of the infrastructure, but I'm assuming there's some synergies there, right? You can't replicate that on-prem. So that availability story is huge. Whatever, Andrew.
Just synergies, really? It's a perfectly cromulent word.
And then as soon as I can fly to Dublin. Anyway, between the HA story, the DR story, and scale is the other one, right? And I say this as a joke, but being able to swipe your credit card and add scale, like you can't do that on-prem. You know, you have to get like a purchase order and stuff has to like get shipped, drop shipped to you and install it. Having that, being able to react agilely to those events is pretty darn valuable. And that's the value prop that I have for customers when we talk about why. So there's those two things.
What about you?
I think
Anna?
the biggest thing for me in the cloud, I think my aha moment was being able to script out my environment. So I have everything in the Azure CLI. So I was doing a demo where something went wrong with my AKS cluster, and it was about half an hour to go before my session, which was on Kubernetes. So something was going on. It wouldn't deploy a load balance service. So there's no mucking about. Everything's scripted out. Blow the old one away. Spin up a new one. Up we go. There we are. 15 minutes, and I'm good to go with my session. And that, for me, that was okay. I'm not having to reformat flash my SD cards in my Raspberry Pi cluster here. I'm literally just running a couple of lines of code to get my environment back up and running. So yeah, absolutely the automation building from that as well.
So to kind of go into, you touched on a little bit, so like the three pillars, like availability, performance, and security, the meat and potatoes of SQL Server. Let's focus on kind of the ideas of performance and internals, right? So again, AKB laser focused on internals. How can someone that does, spent all those years watching all the deep dive sessions that have been done in the community, how can I take those skills and apply them to cloud? And especially, I guess, from a troubleshooting standpoint, how does that translate when I want to get in there and I see there's a performance regression and I know what to do on-prem? Like, what does that look like in the cloud? I mean, how's it different?
Is that for me?
Either one. I'm looking at both. I'm looking at both of you.
I'll start. So, look at the talk I did. I think, Anthony, you mentioned this the other day in social media, inside wait types, spin locks, latches, those kind of things, right? Hey, some of that stuff still applies. The DMVs you know and love work in both Azure SQL Managed Instance and Azure Database. Not everything in database is necessary, but even in there, that may be needed. So there are some scenarios that still make sense for you. What's going to be different now is you're going to take a look at an IO latching problem, for example, and you're going to see some latencies and go, yeah, I've got an IO latency problem here, but guess what? I don't own the storage for this stuff. Like, what do I do? So, and this is why I'm going to let Anna chime in. This is when you get in this discussion of things like service tiers, where you start making deployment choices or configuration choices to dictate what are the resource limits you may or may not get. So, Anna, talk about you being somebody who's spent not as much time in 27 years in SQL Server for me, but you got into the discussion of service tiers, and maybe that'll help explain to Anthony. Like when you start looking at troubleshooting, then your choices become sometimes that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the service tiers, and I think like your existing understanding of how these things work helps too, right? Because, for example, when you deploy business critical database, behind the scenes, we're deploying an always on availability group for you, but it is going to be really useful if you understand how that works, when it comes to troubleshooting, understanding different latencies. For example, so what is it? Sometimes you can see header sync weights.
Hater
So
sync
that's,
commit, exactly.
yeah, so that's a great example of like, that understanding. Now you see that and you're like, oh, I understand what's going on because of my existing knowledge. So I think that really has a big part of it. And when it comes to service tiers, like understanding what workload your current service is running and what it can handle and what it's not able to handle, there are different limits. So, whether or not you scale up or down is going to play a big part of that. And, I was watching a session from Joe Sack a while ago, and he was talking about performance. And he said, we have over 6 or 7 million databases, maybe more at this point, running in Azure today. And probably most of our customers aren't doing the things that you all are doing, like query tuning, increasing performance, looking at query plans. All this stuff is going to help save customers a ton of money. And I remember Joe saying, like, there's a huge opportunity here for folks who understand performance and how to troubleshoot performance to save a lot of customers, a lot of people, a lot of money who have just kind of scaled up. They've just kind of said, oh, we'll just scale up, pay way more, but it'll get it done. When really with some performance skills and performance hacking, they could really just run faster with less cores.
Yeah, let me give you an example, Anthony, where your internals knowledge, like Anna just talked about, could apply. And actually, it's a lab we have in our workshop in performance. So I run a CPU intensive workload. And as it turns out, it's a pretty simple set of queries with our sample database AdventureWorks. And it may not be the best query in the world, but it's really not tunable. I mean, it pretty much needs CPU. So I run this example, and the behavior of this is SOS schedule yield weights and runnable requests. So that's your symptoms. And I show this in the lab, right? And so you look at this, and if you saw this on premise, you may say, oh, I don't know if I've got enough CPU resources for this. And you talked about earlier about scale. So what would you do if you just needed more CPUs? Well, in your virtual machine environment, you may need more vCores, but your administrators may say, sorry, not enough on this host. So you need to migrate everything to another host, and we don't even know when that's available yet. Well, what do you do in Azure? Well, in Azure, you use Alter Database, use the portal with a slider, or you use PowerShell or CLI. You just say, look, I just want, 8 CPUs now. And within, actually a short amount of time, you're available to run that workload and see no problems. And then as Anna talked about serverless, they can go a step further and say, I just want to give a range of CPUs and you guys just figure it out. You just scale it as I need and I just pay what I have, right? So great example of you recognizing a common SQL Server symptom pattern and deciding what to do, and Azure making it easier for you to solve it.
Yeah, and I think you were touched on a pretty good point there, Anna, with understanding the architecture, right? Knowing what business critical means, knowing where the data physically sits, so that when you do look at header sync commit, you kind of know what that means, right? Versus being like, well, what does that mean? I don't control this thing. So I know you've produced a ton of content around high availability architectures, and there's also been a lot of engineering to extend that by the team. And so I encourage folks to look into that content, and we'll throw that into resources for everyone. So, cool.
But there are other things like Hyperscale, she mentioned, right? We've added new diagnostics to Hyperscale because it could be you could gain better performance by going to a higher level of vCores to get more what we call caching. We have caching on the primary compute node, RBPX caching. So we only have a certain amount of that based on how many vCores you have. So you could recognize a performance pattern based on weight types. You could look at that, or even look at virtual app file stats and say, oh, I think I could get faster if I just had more vCores because I'm going to get more of memory resources and more caching resources. So those are still where those tried and true SQL Server skills apply, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if folks listening haven't heard of Hyperscale yet, horizontally scaling SQL Server, think about it that way. It's pretty awesome. So
Anna has a super cool demo she does with read scale on the fly. Like, imagine you setting up Hyperscale and you start doing a read workload, or you see the throughput you get, and you just say, I'd like some more give me some more. And you just see this thing just fly and keep going. It's actually way cool.
Yeah,
That's actually awesome. Yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah,
Pretty
it's
neat.
pretty cool. If you didn't know, in Hyperscale, you can have 0 replicas, but you can kind of dynamically scale them up or down as you need them. So if you're doing some heavy reporting or you're doing some HTAP type of workloads, you can scale up to 4 readable replicas, drastically increase your read scale capabilities and not affect your read-write workload at all. So that's pretty cool.
So this is like a Monday morning scenario when everyone comes in and immediately hits execute on all their reports.
or like Slack on this past Monday.
I would really encourage you guys to study Hyperscale. If you're a SQL Server person listening and you're like, I want to learn more about some new innovation at Microsoft with the cloud, I think you're going to find that, like an Azure SQL Database scenario, Hyperscale is going to become architectures for us that might just be eventually the default. Like we just may say, oh, when you get a database, you just get Hyperscale, right? And then you decide what to do from there. And so, so shameless plug. I think it was, God, what conference was this? Sorry, there's been too many.
We're all about shameless plugs here. Don't worry about it. It's
Yeah.
fine.
I think it was
You did it
Summit.
at past Summit, you and Denzel.
Ribeiro is a PM on our team that leads Hyperscale. He and I did an Inside Hyperscale talk. Denzel's also done it in other sessions as well. So we go into the architecture of Hyperscale and why it's significant. I also do cover it as well in this book, and we talk about it some as well in our fundamentals. But it's truly interesting because it's still the SQL Server engine. We're just taking advantage of how to use the SQL Server engine in an innovative way. For example, we can separate the log processing into a different node from your primary compute node, but we're still just remotely pointing to the log through the main engine on the primary compute, using things like page servers, that kind of type technology as a caching background. It's just a way of doing distributed tiered architecture to make SQL faster, to be honest with you.
And we're still running the SQL Server XE spelled incorrectly, as I learned as someone who hasn't been doing SQL forever. I was like, Bob, there's typos everywhere. What is this?
Do you guys know this story?
Tell it, please.
Oh, absolutely, go for it.
So Anna's question to me, and Anna, did you ask it as a side question on one of our videos? And you said, oh, I got to put this in the video. I can't remember how it worked, but it was basically like, Bob, SQL Server.exe is missing an E at the end of SQL Server. Like, was this a mistake back in the 90s? Were you guys just like, you guys don't know how to spell back in 1990, whatever? I'm like, oh, no, Anna, there's a long history before you were born. I'm sorry. Basically, you got to remember that SQL Server first came out on OS2 after we ported from Sybase, and then on Windows NT, right? And at that time, when it first came out, this is DOS naming convention. So it was 8 characters .exe. And so SQL Server without the E is 8 characters. So we couldn't have 9 characters. So somebody decided, well, I think if we say the word server, we can take off the E and that still works. And so Anna said, well, why don't we just go change it? I'm like, oh my goodness, can you imagine the dependency that we have within all of our stuff that is based? I said, don't ever expect that ever to change. There's your little history of SQL.
It would probably be easier to change the size of a page than it would be.
There you go.
To
Oh yeah, which we did one time. We changed the size of a page in SQL 7.0, and I don't want to go through that again.
Yeah, it's
It used to be 2K back before SQL 7.0.
Well, I wonder though, I guess at some point in time, hardware is going to change, and you would imagine that would influence the size of that data structure, right? Especially as we see things change physically inside of things like DRAM, persistent memory, SSDs, and things like that, so that you could have a shorter block-sized path, right?
We've talked about it, believe me.
Please don't. We'll have to change the name of the conference.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Man, we didn't think about future-proofing this, did we?
Yeah. We had discussed the ramifications of doing something like that, but right now we're still good with the 8. So.
Okay, let's see what's next on deck. So we've talked a lot about how do we get the cloud? I think what's in the cloud. What are the missteps? What are the anti-patterns? What are people doing that come back to you and go, Bob, this or Anna, this didn't work the way that I thought it was going to work? Like, what are the common pitfalls that you're seeing out in the field?
Anna, you go ahead. Anna spends a lot of time, actually a little more than me right now, working with some of our field folks. So why don't you start, and I'll give a few thoughts after that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a few things, to be aware of. One thing that I've heard, and maybe not in production scenarios, which is probably good, is just little things to be aware of, like, and things that might change. Like, for example, today, if you take your production database, which is running in general purpose, you move it to Hyperscale, and then you realize, because we're still working on Hyperscale, certain capabilities related to it to bring it up to par, like to be 100% compatible with general purpose today. But maybe you realize that something is missing and you're like, oh, I'm going to go back. Well, you can't go back. So I would say that's a big one today. And it's something we're working on, right? You should be able to switch between service tiers. Like you can switch from general purpose to business critical and back, no problem. But with Hyperscale, and this came to mind because we were talking about it, since it's a completely different architecture, we're still working on figuring out, like, once we bring you to Hyperscale, how do we bring you back for general purpose? So I would say, like, you really have to, and there's no easy way out here. Like you have to pay attention. Even if you choose to move to Azure SQL Managed Instance, for example, there are some things that aren't in VM today, that aren't in Managed Instance, that are in SQL Server 2019. So, you might think from listening to Bob or I, talk to you that like, oh, managed instance for sure, but you need to go yourself and assess your SQL Server and make sure that, where you're going is going to work for your situation. So I think a lot of things, just happen because they're overlooked, or things you think might work and then they don't work. And you have to be careful where you go and what you do.
I'll chime in. If you think about VM first, I think the number one thing that we are working very hard on, and we have a dedicated team that works for Amit Banerjee that's focused on this, right? And for a VM, it's all about storage performance. I got to be honest with you. So getting that right, because we actually have the disk system now, right? We have the disk system, you need to use it. But trying to make sure you use the right options, the right sizes, all those kind of type things are really what bites a lot of people. And so we're trying to do everything we can to make that a better experience, give you the right guidance, and make sure storage works for you. Because as you know, for SQL Server, that's really huge. So for VM, I would say that is one of the number one things. The other thing people might run into is sizing that VM. Because as you know, you pick something called the VM size when you deploy, and it has these letters, right? You've seen the letters DS and E and M and all these kind of type things you have out there for Azure. And so figuring out what that right size is and making sure you don't overdo it. People, as Anna just you guys have talked a little bit about, somebody may pick a really large VM size and they don't really even need that. They're paying a lot of money, going, why am I using this huge size? So that's one thing. For managed instance, that's been an interesting one. Just first of all, remember right now, as of today, that publicly for GA, the largest database size you can have in a managed instance is 8 terabytes. Now we're working on a preview, I think, for something larger than that, like 16 terabyte, but that's a size limitation. And that's not just for a database, that's for the entire instance. So any databases, including system databases on instance, have a size, type limitation. So that's one thing. There is TC, even though it's a surface area thing, it's an instance level thing, there are differences. If you're moving SQL agent jobs, there could be some things you might run into. One thing you might be bid on right away is you use domain authentication, Windows integration. And now you've got to go to Azure Active Directory. There's some things there that you've got to consider and take a look at. We are trying to we're even thinking down the road, like how do we make that really seamless though, right? And then I would say, and there are other T-SQL differences that we document very clearly. You should take a look at, things to pay attention to. And you think about Azure Database, that's the one, if you're a SQL Server person today, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, especially when it comes to instance level stuff. But know this, if you're a DBA and you're used to managing an instance, Azure Database, with a few exceptions, runs on a dedicated instance of SQL. We just don't expose the visibility of that to you. But for example, some of your DMVs you know and love, like OS Wait Stats, for example, that's just going to work on an Azure database. You're just going to be looking at your database's version of it, right? But Azure Database might be the one you're going to be tripped a little bit more on from an application point of view, whether it's SQL CLR or even just like cross-database queries you can't do with Azure Database today, link servers, those kind of type things. You've got to pay attention and think about, where am I headed? Those are the ones that stand out for me that I've just seen, especially as we've done presentations and talked to customers about this whole journey of going from SQL Server to Azure.
Yeah, and I'll say just to add one more thing, I'll say, like, when we talk about these things, a lot of these things that we know about are things that we're also actively trying to fix. So like for VM, for for the storage configuration, like we released recently a new deployment experience that makes this so much easier. And it's actually just going to take care of a lot of things for you. So like you'll see, I think IaaS move closer to PaaS, but still giving you the control like in the future.
Yeah,
and one last thing to add to that, I know this is one in particular you really should pay attention to, not just the move to hyperscale and go back, but it's the database itself. So for example, when you get a database into Azure Database or managed instance, you cannot back that up and restore it back to SQL Server. That is one we get hit a lot on, but we are actively talking about how to make that experience different, believe me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, that's a huge one, because yeah, if you're in the cloud and you need to go back, it's not a pleasant story. That's good to hear that it's being worked actively. So yeah, but back to what you're describing a second ago, Anna, the deployment in the portal with the Azure or the SQL Server specific stuff, right? Like where do my data files land? Where do my log files land? That's all language that DBAs are familiar with, and that helps us bridge the gap back to what this really looks like from an Azure architecture standpoint, and being able to choose different storage types and things like that. So that piece of functionality, I think, is a big gateway for helping that on-prem DBA understand what it means to translate that back into Azure-ness, for lack of a better term. Bob, for me, the big one, you were talking about database and like what the differences are. A huge just gap that I had to bridge was the instance level security stuff, and just kind of wrapping my head around how people or how things log in. That was a huge mind bender. And then adding elastic pools a little bit to the complexity of that, and being able to trying to get some sort of like homogenized SQL or security environment over that. And then access and firewalls was another big one. You know, do I really want this thing on the internet? That's like, as a DBA, you're like, whoa, I need a private endpoint. This has to happen.
Yeah, so huge call out to Anna on this one real quick. In our Anna security, in the configuration, I think in security section, Anna has some extremely good stuff on networking security you should pay attention to. We really struggled on how much we would go into the depths of this. So I think there's enough in there to give you the knowledge you need, and then go talk to your networking team after the fact. Anna, you should just comment a little bit, because there's some good stuff in there to help you with that piece.
Yeah, definitely. And I would definitely recommend going and checking it out. You know, we understand that DBAs aren't, for the most part, networking gurus, and that hasn't been something they've been had to be a part of. But I think it's super important. And Bob and I had some back and forth, because I was like, I really think we need to cover private endpoint and how firewall rules, wow, and virtual networks work. We need to cover that because DBAs need to know what's going on, because it's very important. So yeah, I'd definitely go check that out. I would say, like, once you kind of get the foundations there, the other things kind of start to make sense. Like when we first started looking at this, I think both of us were like, what? And now hopefully, at least to us, it's more clear. And I hope that to you all, it becomes more clear too.
Yeah, if you're worried as a SQL Server person that I can't make Azure SQL secure for your environment, I think if you just watch Anna's section in our security module alone, you're going to walk away after, I don't know, it maybe took her about 4 or 5 of the YouTube videos to go through this a little bit and show examples. You're going to go, oh, okay, I get it. I have the options. I know what to do. I can talk to my networking team. So yeah, I think that was a big, I know initially I even told Anna, I was like, I think we just should skip this thing, man. I don't even know if we can do it. And she really proposed to me a really great way of fundamentally talking about it, but giving you enough details, even showing you things how DNS names show up and don't show up public or not. So we have all that in there for you.
Yeah, I've made my way through that content a couple of times to help me close the gap on that. So yeah, definitely quality.
Of course, for everyone listening, all the links that have been mentioned in the show, we will absolutely get off Bob and Anna and drop them into the show notes. So they'll all be there on the YouTube channel, no problem.
So we wrap up every mixed extent with this question, and it's for both of you all. If you could have one feature in either Azure SQL or SQL Server implemented tomorrow, what's that feature?
Oh, I got it. I could go first. I think you guys would probably agree with me.
Go for it.
Polybase. You know, it's the #1 requested feature for Azure SQL Database today. I think it would be great to have. We're working on some things that leverage Polybase, but aren't quite exactly Polybase. But if we could have it tomorrow, I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I've talked Polybase through my nose, you know, for a year, and I want to see that show up managed instance. But I'll just go back to core SQL stuff, to be honest with you, that I want to show up. I want this to be everywhere. Like, I literally don't want anybody to have to worry about the word tempdb for the rest of my life. Like I want SQL Server and Azure SQL that we literally don't even use that word anymore. You just go use the product and you don't worry about anything. We've got a lot of strides there, right? We've made a lot of changes and strides. But I can't think of anything in my entire existence of working in SQL Server that has been more of a problem for people than configuring and monitoring and maintaining tempdb. And so that would be my wish, is that we would just eliminate you even knowing that exists. You just use it. It works.
Yeah. If I literally had to have that, Bob, and you make that happen, you can expect a hug from me if I ever see you, even if you don't like hugs.
You know, I'm not a hugger, but I'll take a beer. I'll take a Mac and
I had to explain the exact pain points behind tempdb to an infrastructure manager today, literally this morning. Why do I have to keep adding space to this T drive? Was the conversation, right? It's that exact conversation. So
don't get me, we've made strides. It's just, I want it to like be removed from the link, you know, the language of SQL. Like, you don't worry about it anymore. It just is part of what we do. So
for sure. So back to Polybase though, Anna, why would that feature bring a lot of value to SQL DB? Why is it the most requested feature?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you know, Polybase just for the 100 level allows you to access other data sources using T-SQL, and also kind of pushing down those queries to where it's going. So I think, you know, it's going to be really huge for a lot of reasons. For me, coming from a data science background, bringing data from all these sources into one place, but just the data I need for whatever it is that I'm trying to do, I think is really going to help in bringing new insights faster. And yeah, and it's something that, you know, everywhere I go, probably almost every session I do, someone's asking, when's Polybase coming?
I'll take some blame there, because I spent, as Anna knows, the entire calendar year of 2019, you know, raving about Polybase and how well you can get data personalization across all this stuff. And then all of a sudden now people are like, well, how do I get that in Azure database, right?
Well, what's crazy, if you combine that with deployment in code and Polybase, you could basically have ad hoc distributed systems for data processing. Bang. Like, that's pretty powerful construct, right? So,
definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, cool. That's a wrap for today's Mixed Extent. I want to thank you both so very much, Anna Hoffman and Bob Ward, for joining us and providing the Mixed Extents and the AKB community a lot of insight into what Azure SQL is, what it means to us as the traditional on-prem DBAs, and how we can leverage that going forward. So thank you both so very much.
We should also mention that the book is available at all good booksellers, and probably some bad ones too.
But Anna, real quick before we leave, Anna has a book as well.
Oh yeah, we have a book. It's probably geared more towards developers and people who are newer to SQL, but it is called Practical Azure SQL Database for Modern Developers. So I can shoot you guys a link to share as well.
Absolutely, and we'll get that into the show notes for everyone, along with I'm going to say there's going to be about 50 links here, but we'll get there.
Right? So nice. Any closing remarks from AKB or Anna?
No, I just want to say thank you very much to Anna and Bob for coming on and talking with us. Mark, you muted.
Thank you for coming.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I want to give a shameless plug for Anna here a little bit. You know, this is somebody who doesn't have 27 years of SQL Server experience, but has not just kept up with me, but exceeded me in many different ways with SQL in this past calendar year. But get ready for this. Anna has a show called Data Exposed. Anna, I don't even know how many of these things are. I tried to get on Data Exposed. I'm like, Anna, I want to do a show Data Exposed. She goes, yeah, I think in April you can get on the show. I'm like,
I tried earlier this week too.
That's true, you did.
Imagine this amazing podcast and now a live show that she's doing, where if you want to keep up what's going on with us at Microsoft engineering team and with the community, really encourage you guys to pay attention and subscribe and listen into that.
Thanks, Bob.
Fantastic. All right. And we're going to say goodbye to everyone out there. Thank you for listening. And we'll see you again next month.